A lot of us are wondering what in the world happened with Matt Gaetz. Why did he choose to step down? And there's a lot of theories out there, but this one has garnered about 6 million views on X. And so I've linked the original thread with all of the sources in the description. And so I'm just going to read through it for you guys because I think it's very interesting. And if you're not on X and you haven't seen this, I think that you should hear it. So here we go. This story begins in fall 2019 in Florida with this man, Joel Greenberg. At the time, Joel Greenberg was 2.5 years into his first term as the tax collector for Seminole County. Greenberg is your classic rich kid who dinks through life, lighting fires that everyone else is forced to put out, never landing hard because daddy's money always catches his fall. You know the type, we all do. And Joel approached his role as tax collector no different than any other. By fall 2019, Seminole County was awash with rumors about the federal investigation into Greenberg's crypto scam with tax collector dollars. These rumors inspired local music teacher Brian Butte to throw his hat in the ring and challenge Greenberg in the Republican primary slated for the following year. Despite the many advantages Greenberg had over Butte in the race, incumbency, wealth, name recognition, etc., Greenberg's significant criminal activity as a tax collector likely contributed to him becoming obsessed with destroying Butte, both publicly and privately. So throughout late 2019 and into 2020, Greenberg rolled out a series of ever-escalating smear tactics targeting Butte. They started rather typically, labeling Butte, who is from Michigan, as a carpetbagger, but they grew increasingly vicious. He created fake Facebook profiles pretending to be Butte's students, leaving comments on public posts trashing Butte as an awful teacher and a pervert. And there's a link and a screenshot corroborating this. Greenberg's antics finally reached an apex when he mailed handwritten letters to the administrators at the school where Butte taught, accusing him of sexually assaulting his students. Greenberg probably didn't expect those letters to be taken seriously, or else he likely would have been a little more careful. But alas, he was not, and the letters were turned over to the local sheriff's office with both his fingerprints and DNA that were lifted from them, and he was arrested on June 23rd, 2020, and charged by the DOJ with stalking. At the time of his arrest, Greenberg's phone was confiscated and searched, and, believe it or not, this is where his real legal troubles began. On his cell phone and later home computers, police found evidence of Greenberg committing damn near every crime in the book: embezzlement, drugs, prostitution, identity theft, wire fraud, crypto market manipulation, and so on. But the silver tuna was a series of messages that occurred in the late spring through the early fall of 2017 between Greenberg and a then 17-year-old girl, discussing, among other things, their many sexcapades around Florida and beyond. Further investigation revealed from December 2016 through 2018, Joel Greenberg was a customer on a sugar daddy website where he solicited various women for sex and escort services. This is where he met the aforementioned 17-year-old. And there are screenshots from the court documents here corroborating this, and once again, this will be linked in the description. All told, Mr. Greenberg spent over $70,000 on hookers he met on the sugar daddy website, much of which he paid for with his government-issued Amex card. In August 2020, the DOJ charged Joel Greenberg with sex trafficking of a minor, identity theft, and production of false identification documents, among other things. Turns out, in Florida, the Office of County Tax Collector doesn't just collect taxes, they also issue state driver's licenses and state IDs. Mr. Greenberg had taken full advantage of this privilege during his time in office. Greenberg had not only created multiple false Florida ID cards for himself, he also created a fake ID for his underage lover after finding out that she had been lying to him about her age. Again, a screenshot from the court documents. And this is where Matt Gaetz comes into the story. From what I can gather, Gaetz and Greenberg became acquainted at some point in the first half of 2017. The first public record of them associating on a private level comes from a picture posted on X, then Twitter, on July 8, 2017 with none other than Roger Stone. I think it's safe to say that the two did become friends. How good of friends? That's up for debate, but there was a relationship. After getting arrested in June 2020, at some point, Mr. Greenberg's lawyer approached Bill Barr's DOJ with a proposition. He claims that he can provide evidence from that a sitting congressman, Gaetz, had engaged in sex acts with a minor. Bill Barr's DOJ then proceeds to open a secret investigation into these allegations that remains a secret until it is leaked the next spring, March 30th, 2021, by the New York Times. Faithful viewers of the Tucker Carlson Show were treated to a peek behind the DC curtain on a random Tuesday night in late March 2021. Earlier that day, the New York Times had released the bombshell story alleging that the DOJ had opened an official investigation into Gaetz over allegations he had engaged in sex with an underage girl. Following Tucker's opening monologue, he introduced Matt Gaetz and gave him free rein to tell his side of the story. Anyone watching is unlikely to soon forget the absolute bizarre story that Gaetz then proceeded to tell. It involved a $25 million extortion threat against his father, who helped help free an American hostage in Iran that would be paid back with a presidential pardon for Gaetz on all these charges. Gaetz demanded that the FBI release the tapes they had in their possession of the recordings made by his father in interviews with his extortionist. He didn't hesitate for a second to name the alleged extortionist, David McGee. David McGee was a former prosecutor for the Northern District of Florida who now worked at the prestigious Biggs & Lane law firm in Pensacola, Florida. And here's a screen grab of McGee's profile. He was resolute and unafraid when talking, was Gaetz, and yet he sounded like an absolute lunatic. I know, I was watching live, and I wasn't the only one. Tucker was clearly extremely annoyed and unconvinced by the end, and yet 3.5 years later, we now know that everything he said was true. Bob Levinson was the man in Iran. The official story about Bob Levinson is that he was a retired FBI agent who was contacted by He was contacted off the books by the CIA unit to run a covert op in Iran. He was kidnapped from Kish Island following a meeting with an American fugitive living in Iran that had been arranged by former NBC producer named Ira Silverman. Levinson got kidnapped in March 2007, and his disappearance was acknowledged by George Bush in 2007 as concerning, but no one from the federal government will admit that Levinson was working for the CIA. Unbeknownst to everyone at the time, from 2009 to 2011, the FBI was running its own covert operation to get their retired agent back, and they had devised an ingenious plan to keep the whole thing off the books. They contracted with a Russian billionaire, Oleg Deripaska, to pay for the rescue mission, $20 million in total, in exchange for fast-track green cards for Deripaska and his family. Enter David McGee. During his time at the DOJ, McGee had worked an organized crime task force. That's how he knew Bob Levinson, who specialized in Russian money laundering. McGee became a liaison between the Levinson family and Deripaska. Anyway, the FBI team got a couple of proof-of-life videos. They have a soft arrangement in place when the Clinton State Department stepped in and shut the whole thing down. Somehow, something got them spooked. What that was has never been disclosed. After 2011, Levinson is never heard from again. All along, the Iranians deny any involvement in his disappearance, as expected, so eventually the CIA got desperate and a handful of classified documents confirming Levinson's contract with the CIA were leaked to the AP in December of 2013. Still, the Iranians didn't budge. This was surprising because at this point they no longer had any reason to lie. The Americans weren't lying anymore. Time to start the negotiations. But no, the news was greeted with radio silence. Years go by and no more pictures or videos ever arrived, and then came the Iranian nuclear deal of 2016. Unbeknownst to most, the Obama team had negotiated the release of 4 Americans being held in Iran in exchange for the U.S. dropping charges against 7 Iranian nationals for sanctions violations. Bob Levinson was not one of these Americans that was released. The American Jewish community was furious. They already saw the Iranian duel as a stab in the back to Israel, but when the word broke about the prisoner exchange and Bob Levinson wasn't on the list, many took it as a deliberate betrayal of the American Jews. Flash forward some, Trump took office, canceled the nuclear deal. Christine Levinson sued Iran in U.S. courts and was awarded a $1.2 billion judgment in January 2020. And in March 2020, the U.S. government declares Bob Levinson is legally dead. At some point in 2020, a former Air Force intelligence officer named Bob Kent claimed to have received news from his network in Iraq alleging that Bob Levinson was still alive. Kent even claims he's received pictures to prove it. So Kent contacted David McGee, who then told Kent about the last privately funded search and rescue for Levinson, and that's when Kent hatched the plan to rope Don Gaetz into paying for this one. Now, I know what you're all wondering. How did these men know about the Matt Gaetz investigation? To my knowledge, it's never been revealed. If I had to guess, I'd say someone in the DOJ or the FBI leaked that info to McGee, who then told Kent about it when he was contacted. But that's still only half the answer. On March 16th, 2021, when Don Gaetz received the first text message from Bob Kent, it revealed the grand plan. In exchange for Don fronting Mr. Kent's rescue mission of Bob Levinson, unnamed agents with powerful contacts in the Biden administration would convince the president to give Don's son Matt a full presidential pardon on his looming sex trafficking charges. The price, $25 million. Naturally, Gaetz Sr. was incredulous. What in the world is this man talking about? Matt wasn't facing any sex trafficking charges. Don called Matt, who immediately told him to contact the local FBI office. The FBI suggested that Don meet with David McGee wearing a wire, and Don agreed. However, just before the meeting took place, Don requested a written acknowledgement from the FBI on the purpose of this investigation and meeting. He was worried something he said could be used against Matt in the case and they didn't know anything about. The FBI was reluctant at first, but eventually agreed. The very next day, the New York Times ran the leak on the DOJ's case against Gaetz. Going back and watching the Tucker and Gaetz interview again, everything he said finally made sense. The FBI had planned to use Don's meeting with McGee against Matt. The quasi-immunity demand from Don quashed that, so they leaked the story to the New York Times and then buried the wiretapes. McGee and Kent denied everything. They said there was no extortion. It was a simple proposition. They accused Matt of using this to distract from his charges. A third man was eventually charged with wire fraud in relation to the case, and then the FBI just dropped it all and pretended like nothing ever happened. But wait, there's more. Because this story wasn't already weird enough, here's another twist. So at the same time that Don Gaetz was getting these messages from Kent and McGee, Scott Adams, the Dilbert guy, receives a message from an acquaintance of his, Jacob Novak, who works as the media director for the Israeli consulate. The first text arrived on Saturday before the story broke, and here's what the text says. Scoop I can't report. Rep. Gaetz is the subject of a secret grand jury probe of sex with minors and possible murder conspiracy. I trust the source. Charges and accusations apparently are very credible. That's the text message. The next two arrive on Wednesday, the 31st, after Gaetz went on to Tucker and revealed David McGee's name to the world. And then the texts say that accusations do not sound credible. And the backstory is that this is screwing up the efforts to free Bob Levinson. Gaetz' dad was secretly funding us, so I'm very much wanting this to be untrue. So essentially, it's McGee admitting to what had happened. And these text messages, the screenshots are posted in the link in the description. To his credit, the whole thing was sketchy as hell to Scott Adams, so he took it upon himself to release Novak's messages. The Israeli consulate immediately distanced themselves from Novak's messages, but he was not fired or disciplined. And here's a link to the article that was in the Jerusalem Post that reported that. So Joel Greenberg pled guilty to sex trafficking, identity fraud, wire fraud, and a host of other charges in May 2021. He was sentenced to 11 years in prison, with 10 of these coming from the mandatory minimum imposed by the sex trafficking charge. The DOJ did not close its case against Matt Gaetz until October of 2022. They never publicly acknowledged that he was not charged, although it became fairly obvious once you learned that Joel Greenberg had produced fake IDs for the underage girl in question. How can you convict someone of statutory rape when this woman was using a real state of Florida driver's license to present as being of age? But of course, because it's a swamp, that's not where Matt's troubles ended. The snakes in D.C. were going to milk the investigation for all it's worth, and when Gaetz went for McCarthy during the speaker fight, McCarthy and his allies plotted carefully to get their revenge. We saw the culmination of that plotting on full display when Matt stepped back from being considered for Attorney General. So, again, there's a lot of unanswered questions. Who is the we that Jacob Novak was talking to in the text messages? Who leaked the info about the Gaetz case to Bob Kent? And was Joel Greenberg running a honeypot scheme? And if so, for who? It'd be nice to know. But that's the story. So it sounds as though this guy had created a fake ID for this girl. It was a real ID issued from the state of Florida, but it was fake, as in the guy that issued it knew that it was incorrect, and he was trying to protect himself from his crimes that he was convicted of. So what do you guys think about that story? It's absolutely nuts, right? But I wanted to put it out there because it seems just crazy enough and so entangled that it could be true. I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.